Um, okay, so I'm really privileged to be joined on stage, as they say, the virtual stage, by our colleague Kelvin Cheatle. Kelvin is the Director of Workforce at Kingston, and Kelvin was the winner and recipient of the President's Award for Outstanding Achievement this year. I've known Kelvin as a person, if you like, not perhaps face to face, particularly over the last 18 months, but he's always been around, always been very talked about in a good way in HPMA circles. He was a previous past president. So he's going to share with us his reflections of a lifetime of HR in the NHS. So over to you, Kelvin.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I always get nervous when people say you've been talked about a lot, but thank you for the codicil there. That's very helpful. I'm really honoured and chuffed to be invited to speak to you today. And winning this Lifetime Achievement Award was quite overwhelming, to be honest. I was actually in the pub with my team because we were up for HR Team of the Year. And I was very suspicious when halfway through the event, my wife walked in, to which I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" It was absolutely lovely, and thank you everyone for the support that you gave me in achieving that, and indeed through my career. And what I wanted to do, I hope not in an egotistical way, is take you on a bit of a journey through this rather long career I've had in the NHS, and talk about some of the highlights and indeed some of the lowlights as almost a reflective learning experience, because there are many great colleagues on this call, people who've achieved more than me, who would have had similar experiences. But I always feel in the HR profession we're a bit shy talking about those things. But if you look at the bookshelves, they're full of books by lawyers and accountants and musicians and the rest of it. I've actually been looking for a book by a really great HR practitioner. You know, there's hardly any. So this is a little story. They're all true. And I hope sharing it will give people some insight. You may share some of them, and it may help, particularly the people who are coming through to be the HR leaders of the future. And as I reach probably the latter stages of my long career now, that's really my passion and interest. I hope with this continuing support of HPMA, who, as we'll be talking about, have been a great force for good. So I wonder, Rachel, if you'd be kind enough to put the first slide up, please. So I did get this rather lovely award, which has pride of place in my home, and thank you very much, everyone, for it. It truly was touching and honouring, and the tears flowed. I can honestly tell you that. I actually, before I joined the NHS in 1996, I had a career in local authority in the third sector. So I've really worked, as we'll be hearing, in all the main sectors in HR, but I hope to end my career in the place I love, which is the NHS. And I think getting this award means a special thing to me, because I'm aware of some of the people who've had it before, our very own Dean Royals, Deborah O'Day, and many other people who have achieved so much, probably much more than me in their careers, who have been recipients of this prestigious award. So it's a great honour to be in the same company as them. So let's do some learning and sharing over those 25 years I've been an HR director in the NHS. Next slide, please, Rachel. So many of you may recognise this photo. For those of you who don't, it's the old gatehouse from Broadmoor Hospital. It's still there. It's been protected despite all the redesigns in the hospital. And I joined the NHS for the first time straight in as a director from a very senior role in local authority in 1996 as the first HR director Broadmoor Hospital had. It was then termed a special hospital authority. It stood alone before it merged to become part of what we now know as West London Trust. And I arrived at a very strange time, because actually the high secure hospitals, Ashworth, Rampton, Broadmoor, were going through a terrible time. There had been one or two scandals, and they were being vilified in the media. And I must admit, it was a baptism of fire to start my NHS career in a high school setting in a hospital that frankly didn't have a great public profile. And it was here I came across someone whose name is now not spoken about in great terms, Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile had been someone who'd supported the hospital and the patients with fundraising over many years. When I arrived, he was at the very tail end of his association. Of course, we knew nothing about the darker side of his activities. What we knew was he was a very active fundraiser. And fast forward 20 years, I had to be involved in the Savile inquiry. We'll come on to talk about when I worked at Capsticks. It was when I was working at Capsticks. And it was a pretty painful experience, actually, because you kind of feel guilty by association. Not that I'd ever done anything wrong, and not that I was aware of actually him doing anything wrong. But I guess the lesson to learn from that is you never know how the experiences of today are going to play into the realities of tomorrow. So there I was in the middle of the Savile inquiry. If you're really bored, give the report a read. And I guess it also says something about how standards and values change, because one of the questions I remember being asked by one of the investigators, did I think Jimmy Savile was odd? Yes, I did. But he was also, for those of you who remember, a national treasure back in the 1990s. He was in with the royal family, in with government. So I didn't feel there was anything particularly peculiar about him other than he was odd. So when you get to come and comment on his behaviour and what you knew of it, which actually was very little, I only met him 2 or 3 times, you're looking at things through a different lens. And so my reflection on that rather, sordid history with Savile is always think about what you're doing today, because you never know when it's going to come back to you. And I took that learning from that experience, and it's quite difficult being asked to remember things that happened 20 years ago. I have trouble remembering 20 minutes, to be honest. So I think it's very interesting for those of us who work in this profession over a long time about how these things can come back. The other thing, excuse me, I learned about Broadmoor was it was always in the media spotlight. I'm very pleased to say for Nina, who's the great HR director there now, and Rachel before me, and indeed others who've done great work there, that it's a bit less in the public profile now. But back then it was in the our beloved Daily Mail every day for one reason or another. And it was around this period that we became aware that we had a News of the World journalist, for those of you who remember the News of the World, working in the hospital, masquerading as a healthcare assistant. And it taught me about the media. And I'm afraid it taught me low trust about the media, because I remember interviewing this person who assured me in a very tearful tone that he was passionate about mental health, and he most certainly was. Everything his profile said he was. He was non-registered. It was quite difficult to check. And it taught me that the media will use whatever devices they can to get the story, and the story will not necessarily be true. So it was a bit of a shock to open the News of the World, not that I intended to buy it, on the following weekend and read a story about this nurse who'd been trying to get photos of a very high profile patient. You can probably guess who it was. And basically saying what an idiot the HR director was because he'd been taken in by him. I wasn't taken in by him, but there you go. You live and you learn. And I think those 2 little stories say something about working in some of these very challenging environments that we all have to work in. The main learning from Broadmoor was, I think the staff there, I'm sure they are today under Nina, and they were then, they're doing an amazing job. And it's not a publicly valued job in the same way as now in Kingston. People by and large love the hospital because people have their babies there and they get cured of cancer and get their broken legs fixed. But at Broadmoor, you're looking after people who've by and large been through the criminal justice system, albeit it is a hospital. And therefore, it's very difficult to try and turn the negative culture into a positive one. And part of that was working with the unions. And when I arrived, there have been some strikes, some national strikes in the high school hospitals, led by the Prison Officers Association, a very tough, uncompromising union to deal with. And as part of this journey, and I'm sure that was carried on by Rachel, Nina, and others, was trying to get the staff side in the right place and building trust and building what we now call partnership working. So it went from acts of great hostility. I think my car was vandalised about 5 times in the first 6 months, through to eventually in 2007 being asked to speak at their national conference. 10 years of hard graft in between to try and build trust, build relationships, and all the things we now come to know and love as partnership working. So I treasure my time at Broadmoor, West London, and I was very sad to leave. I've been through 3 or 4 different restructurings, haven't we all? But it's a precious organisation, and they do amazing work there. So I think the staff are unsung heroes in many, many ways. Next slide, please, Rachel. So in 2009, having been in the public sector by then over 20 odd years in HR and 13 years Broadmoor, West London, decided it was time to do something different. And I was very lucky that a couple of good colleagues and friends at Capsticks, Gary Hay, Peter Edwards, invited me to go and work with them. I was at this time HPMA president, and it was a great opportunity to work in the private sector and learn about the private sector. And I recommend it to anyone who's a public sector lifer, because it does show you the importance of being lean, of being effective, and perhaps quicker decision making that we can get in the public sector. But my time as HPMA president was fantastic. I got to go to Northern Ireland, to Wales, Scotland, all over England. And what it taught me, I suppose, was the rich diversity of the HR function, and indeed the NHS and our organisations, because they're all different. People have very different approaches, very different ways of communicating. And in Northern Ireland, I remember the greeting was to go to the pub with them for about 4 hours, which I think I managed to survive. But fantastic opportunity. And I think it showed me what a great force for good the HPMA were. The only bit of the role I could never get the hang of, and I know Kevin Croft, who followed me, felt the same, was being called president. That was a slightly embarrassing title, but nonetheless a great honour to be president. And the role with Capsticks was building an advisory service from all the way from Cornwall through the Midlands to the North Teesside, meeting some great colleagues who are still friends and associates today, but in a different role, because they suddenly became, instead of HRD colleagues, they became commissioners of the service. And of course that creates a different dynamic in the relationship. But I learned an awful lot from that period. And probably the highlight really was in around 2015, leading some national work for Capsticks with Helene Donnelly, MBE, who was the whistleblower from Stoke and Staffordshire Trust, who went on to become the country's first, I think her title was cultural ambassador, but she was the first Speak Up Guardian. And Helene and I toured the country talking to boards, HRDs around Speak Up, and it was a real privilege to work with Helene, who's a wonderful person with enormous courage. And it culminated in a conference run by Capsticks, where no less than we had Secretary of State for Health Jeremy Hunt come to speak with us. All credit to Helene there, who had the connection, not me. And it was great doing that work. But it was during this time that one of the bumps in the road, you'll see the headline there, was I was actually waiting at Heathrow Airport to collect my wife, who'd been abroad. She's a touring musician. And the guy in front of me had the Daily Telegraph open on page 3. And to my amazement and surprise, there was a photo of me. I'd always wanted to be on a page 3, but not in the Telegraph. And the subject was a story around an investigation I'd done at Capsticks, with a very derogatory story. And my friends and colleagues at Capsticks had done their best to give a factual representation. But I'm afraid another example of the media publishing what the media wanted to publish. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I learned from that in university, firstly, how great it is to have good friends and colleagues. I remember Deb O'Day, bless her, having a long chat with me, colleagues at Capsticks, and other people who were great friends and supporters saying, you know, it's yesterday's chip wrapping, except of course now it isn't, because it stays on the internet. And although there was no truth in this story, it was a very one-sided, appalling piece of journalism. It followed me when I went to Kingston, because it was followed up by a whistleblowing campaigner who sought to make a fit and proper person allegation against me based on this newspaper article. Why people would rely on the newspapers to tell them the complete truth, I don't know. And I would come on to talk about Kingston, but it was a real difficult issue to deal with, and I had to resort in the end to take legal action against the Telegraph, who withdrew the article, apologised, and paid my fee. So it was a happy ending. But I guess all of that plays into my scepticism about the media and how they play in some of these stories. And I know other colleagues, Christina Ruskowicz, for example, have found themselves on the front page of newspapers. And it does happen in our work, usually around individual cases. So I think coping with the media should be part of the essential toolkit that we all need to learn to deal with, because you never know when it's going to come across and hit you. Thank you, Rachel. Next slide. So I'm just going to explain why you've got pictures of Nick Clegg and Dominic Raab there. I went to Kingston in 2016, and it was a place I'd always wanted to work. I knew the then CEO, Anne Broadmoor, an absolutely brilliant, outstanding chief exec. Anne is now one of the most senior people in NHS over in the east of England, a wonderful boss, couldn't ask for better. And when I joined, the hospital was on a trajectory trying to get its CQC rating improved. It requires improvement when I joined, and under Anne's leadership, we got outstanding. And all credit to her and the rest of the team and the staff. They're an absolutely wonderful workforce at Kingston with a very positive culture, almost the reverse of what I found when I got to Broadmoor. And we'll come on to talk about what they've done during COVID and the rest. But what was particularly interesting, and it's why you can see all these political luminaries stood next to yours truly, is politicians are always interested in you, I find, when there's something current going on. They're less interested when you want something. And the reason that they were there was Brexit was the very live issue. We'd had the referendum. We were in the period of, those numerous general elections. And they all wanted to come to Kingston to meet our wonderful EU staff in the run-up to the whatever year the election was, 2017, the one that elected Theresa May. And it was very interesting talking to them, because I remember saying to Dominic Raab, who obviously now is a very senior official in this government, why do you as a government not stand up more to the media when they write stories that are very derogatory towards our colleagues who are doing a wonderful job wherever they come from? And in the case of Kingston, we had 15% of our workforce from the EU at one time. And, Dominic, in a fairly self-facing way, said, well, they publish bad things about me too, which wasn't really the answer I was looking for. But I think it taught me that you can work very positively with MPs. We have a very good relationship with our locals, which includes Sir Ed Davey in Kingston. And you can have a very good relationship with politicians. The problem is sustaining those relationships, because they don't tend to stick around very long. Working in Kingston has been an enormous privilege, and like many of us on this call, I've got obviously a director role in the trust, building a relationship in place with our partners in Hounslow and Richmond, and trying to do work with South West London colleagues as we develop the ICS. And it's a very complex time, but I think it's a very interesting, challenging time, because we're all being asked to work in different ways And from the darker days, one might say, of 2012, when competition was the key word, obviously collaboration now is absolutely what we're all trying to deal with. So I think it's been a wonderful experience in Kingston, working with some fantastic colleagues that I'll come on to say a bit more about in a minute. And obviously the last 20 months, like all of us, we've been grappling with COVID. We'd always done a lot on health and wellbeing in Kingston, and this really brought it into very sharp relief that looking after our colleagues, and particularly those on the front line, was absolutely essential. And a very fun, nice memory of what can be a very dark and difficult period was back in January this year. We'd worked out that for all the wonderful psychological and physical interventions we were making to support staff, the thing that was really missing was the people who were in the ICU caring for people who were really ill because of COVID, wanted was a hot meal at night, and the restaurant wasn't open. So we, with the help of local providers and our charity, were able to get hot meals at night into those staff, and the HR team served those meals, and they really wanted to do it as their way of showing solidarity. And we had a guest server who was our very own Pranav Isar, the Chief People Officer. So thank you, Pranav, for lending a hand, and we may well call you again to come in and help us with our hot meal. So it's been a lovely experience at Kingston with a fantastic trust. Next slide, please, Rachel. So it's been a long road, and I'm sure there are others who've had greater and more illuminating careers, but some of the stories I've told you that they've all happened, and they've all given me learning. And the things I've learned through that is actually staying power and consistency, sometimes as important as brilliance. There are some fantastically brilliant HR colleagues out there who do wonderful things, many of them much more able than me, but being around, sticking around and delivering consistently, I think, is important too in this profession. And it gives the staff, I think, a feeling of comfort if they haven't got a constant churn going on. And I'm very lucky, as you can see, some of the great colleagues from Kingston there winning another HPMO award. Having those colleagues around you really gives you a great deal of solidity. So at this stage in my career, for me, it's about giving back, wanting to pass on, hopefully, some of the lessons I've learned to colleagues, working with the HPMA, who are an undeniable force for good, and still having a passion for what we do. And despite the 25 years of it, I still wake up every morning wanting to go to work, largely looking forward to it and thinking of the things that are still to come. So who knows what tomorrow will bring. And before I sign off, I just wanted to, it's like one of these radio phone-ins where you want to thank your friends and family, isn't it? But I would just like to thank a few people, as I've had a great honour bestowed on me. So I'd love to thank my team at Kingston, my executive colleagues, my HR team, Linda Dyson, Nikki Hill. Before that, Paul Hargreaves, who's a great deputy, a rising star, Rujin Gamsari, who's gone on to great things working with Tom Simons, and the inimitable Alan Wishart. For those of you who've met Alan in the bar, your life will never be the same again. The wonderful HR directors in South West London. It's a great privilege to help and support Alison, Mary, Sue, Christina, Paul, Saskia, Michael, a lovely bunch to work with, very, very fortunate. The colleagues in London have always been so good and supportive to me. Norma, Claire, Nina, David, Kevin, Julie, far too many to mention, but you know who you are, thank you. And the dear friends at HPMA, Will, Rachel, Lauren, Joy, Dean, Nikki, Craig, the other Rachel, again, too many to mention, but thank you all for your support. And I hope the stories I've told have some resonance. They may make you laugh, they may make you cry a bit in places. I've shed a few tears, but they're all part of this wonderful journey we're on together of HR in the NHS. So thank you very much, HPMA, and thank you for inviting me to speak.
Kelvin, and I've resolved my tech issues. Brilliant. I think we've had some cross points in from that journey, from the way you were telling the stories there, Kelvin. So whilst we've got a few minutes, I think if you could sort of summarise of 3 bits of key advice to take away, what would you give to our participants?
The importance of belonging, Craig, and the importance of good colleagues. So I think none of us are islands. So having people around you can trust and who you can rely on, your good self included, is very important. And without being too preachy, try and treat people the way you would want to be treated yourself. Try and treat people with respect. It will come back to you. And in these jobs, we do difficult jobs. Not everyone's going to love you. It's fairly obvious from the newspaper stories. 1 or 2 people out there blatantly don't love me, but that's part of the job, isn't it? You have to do some difficult things, so you treat people with respect. So belonging and having the HPMA as a force for good, I think, is great. I do think resilience is really, really important, and it's an overcooked word. And what does resilience mean? It's meaning having the mental strength to deal with the difficult times as well as the good times. And we all have if we're honest, we all have our dark days. Stuff goes wrong. Mm-hmm. We've all had our bumps in the road. I always think, I never believe it when people say, I've had a wonderful career, nothing's ever gone wrong. Well, I'd love to know where they work, because stuff goes wrong for all of us if you're worth anything, you've been around, because it's a people industry. So having that strength of character, and that comes from learning, but it comes again from that sense of belonging, having good people you can turn to. And probably the third thing, and I always found this amazing early in my career, someone said to me, you don't have to be good at people to be in the HR profession. I completely disagree. People is what we're about. And I think one of the struggles we had, and I was interesting to listen to Juliet, the previous speaker, and agree with everything she said, is we're surrounded by people who are fantastic nurses, doctors, AHPs, everything you can think of. But actually the number of great people leaders is still quite a small number. And I think trying to get good leadership embedded, and I know it's one of Praynor and Tom's missions in the HROD review, is absolutely essential, because it's the only way to sustain the work that we do in a meaningful way. So being technically brilliant but people deficient is not great. So they'd be my 3 learnings. Great.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Kelvin. So